Hey.
Hey.
What did the waiters say when Chemoarish and AT sat down at his table?
What?
Dust and ruin!
Sule! Today, I want to talk about the Unmade. I can't go much further than that without spoilers, so if you haven't read the Stormlight Archive up to and including Wind and Truth, then either turn back now or proceed at your own caution. Today, we'll be talking about each of the Unmade, what they do, what they've been up to, and where they currently are as of the ending of Wind and Truth. If you enjoy our videos, please subscribe and share this video with a friend. Without further ado, let's start with a brief refresher on what the Unmade even are. The 9 Unmade are splinters of Odium, who each possess unique abilities, powers, and levels of intelligence. These Spren vary in their levels of support to their shard, and the more intelligent or sapient of them tend to find their own way on Roshar. Odium does have power over all of them, and each of them has been called to help wage war against the Heralds and the Radiants over the many desolations. Many of the Unmade act as mindless forces of nature, while others have taken important roles in planning and decision-making. You can think of the Unmade as Odium's heralds, though obviously they're quite different in both form and function. Throughout the Stormlight Archive, we've seen all but one of these horrifying Spren. Though the Unmade are rarely the focus of the story, their impact has toppled kingdoms and devastated civilizations. They are a serious force on Roshar. Quick note, we will often be citing Hessi's Mythica throughout the video, an in-world book about the Unmade that was poorly received by Rosharan scholars. However, through the events of the Stormlight Archive, Hessi has been proven to be correct more often than not. In addition, there's a common theory about the Unmade that their sentience is directly related to the hyphenations in their name. The Unmade with no hyphens in their name are like mindless forces of nature, and while they do share in Odium's intent, they do so in wider and less focused ways. The single hyphenated members have some level of sapience and can think. These are much more direct in their influence over others. The twice hyphenated is highly intelligent, and there is only one such Spren. After what we've learned in Wind and Truth, and with everything we've seen from the Unmade before, this theory seems to be pretty spot on. For simplicity, we're going to be reviewing the Spren in that order: the single named, double named, and finally the lone triple named Spren. Let's start with Ashertmarn, the heart of the Revel. Ashertmarn was one of the primary causes of Alethkar's fall in Oathbringer. This is due to the Unmade's ability to drive people into a gluttonous frenzy. Our first look at this comes all the way back in Interlude 12 of Words of Radiance. We meet the female Ardent Pi, as she has just recently moved to the Yelig-Nar palace to serve under Queen Aesudan. Her new mentor, Brother Lan, attempts to convince the girl that life is good under the Queen, and explains the excess they live in is thanks to her generosity. Pi is frustrated by the lack of devotion to faith and the lazy lifestyle that the royal Ardents live, even allowing food for the poor to go to waste on palace grounds. That evening, Pi defaces the palace, writing about how Queen Aesudan fits the 10 attributes of the Fool. The Queen executes Pi the next morning, and then the Yelig-Nar riots start. Now, let's flash forward to Oathbringer chapter 78. Shallan had successfully devised a plan to be brought to Ashertmarn by the members of the Revel. As Shallan approaches the Oathgate platform, she finds that the control building and the monastery around it have all been converted into a place of grand debauchery. She's encouraged to join, but warned not to cause a storm, but to just enjoy. Later in the chapter, she eventually finds the control building gone. Instead, the entire structure was now covered in creeping black vines pulsing from a large black mass at the center. This mass is Ashertmarn, and he speaks with Shallan directly, encouraging her to just give in to the Revel. She would have given in too, if not for Sja-Anat, another Unmade, snapping her out of Ashertmarn's lure. More on Sja-Anat later. Finally, in chapter 84, Shallan fully confronts Ashertmarn and attempts to remove him from the control building. Finding her pattern blade useless against the creature, she places her hand on the black mass and it fully enters her consciousness. Similar to how she dealt with another Unmade, and again, more on that in a minute. After nearly submitting to the Unmade and losing herself, something seems to shift in the creature, and the mass retreats. Shallan didn't naturally overcome the creature, and we know what really happened to Ashertmarn here, but we'll get into that later when we talk about Sja-Anat. Since then, we haven't seen from the Reveling Heart, but he's surely still out there. Nergaoul is most heavily associated with the Alethi, as he is the cause of the Thrill. This thrill, or battle rage, helped to drive the incredible Alethi battle lust seen throughout the kingdom since at least Gavilar's conquest. The thrill manifests itself as an overwhelming urge to kill without thought or reason. After a fit of thrill-fueled combat in Oathbringer chapter 26, Dalinar surveys the damage he's done. Among the countless bodies taken by his shard blade, Dalinar noticed some Alethi uniforms with burnt-out eyes. This was a mere minor consequence to the Blackthorn, but just shows how powerful Nergaoul's influence can be. The thrill doesn't discriminate, and Dalinar fell to it many times during Gavilar's conquest. We see the thrill drive Dalinar to almost kill his brother, and then it successfully drives him to annihilate the city of Rathalas, and his wife with it. Nergaoul appears in the physical realm as a red mist that depicts warring peoples. The Unmade usually remains invisible in the physical realm, but its cloud of influence can span miles. We learn of this in Interlude 14 of Words of Radiance when Adrotasia and Taravangian assess the damage after the Seas of Yelig-Nar. Adrotasia postulates that the soldiers must have been pushed by Nergaoul, and specifically states it gives us a further reference point. The thrill is at least as strong here as it is in Alethkar, maybe stronger. This is a lot of influence. The thrill likely fueled the many border skirmishes and inner Alethi fighting as it influenced them for years. The Alethi always seemed to need an excuse to go to war. Nergaoul still affected Dalinar and the Alethi at the Shattered Plains as they attempted to fulfill the Vengeance Pact. All the while, Odium was messing with Dalinar's head and setting him up to become his champion, and more on that later. We also see Adolin recognize the thrill in Eshonai in Words of Radiance chapter 84. He only met this Eshonai twice, but he felt he knew her through the way she fought. He sensed her eagerness for blood, her eagerness to kill, the thrill. He did not feel it himself. He sensed it in her. This shows us that the thrill affected both sides of the conflict, but also that it was very apparent to those who have wielded it before. Nergaoul is an interesting case, as unlike most of the other Unmade, we know exactly where he is now. At the bottom of the ocean. During the Battle of Thaylen Field, Nergaoul heavily influences the Sadi's forces to turn on Dalinar's forces, turning the battle in Odium's favor. At the end of the battle in chapter 120 of Oathbringer, Dalinar fully embraces the thrill, giving in to its rage and hate after denying Odium's attack. The Spren coalesces around him in the form of a red mist, and as Dalinar nearly accepts it, he raises the King's Drop, a legendary perfect ruby, and traps the Spren inside. These perfect gemstones are the only vessels that can perfectly hold investiture, and as such, Nergaoul is trapped helplessly. We find out in Rhythm of War chapter 16 that the Coalition had sent the ruby to the bottom of the ocean in an aluminum box to be lost forever. It removed the Unmade as a problem permanently. We all remember that feeling of wonder we had reading the epigraphs at the beginning of The Way of Kings. Seemingly random, yet somewhat ominous phrases that didn't connect to each other, but always ended the same way. Collected on X day, X seconds before death. It wasn't until we learned of Taravangian's unique hospitals in Kharbranth that we were able to piece together what exactly was going on. These death rattles were prophetic visions given by random people right before they were about to pass away. These didn't happen everywhere, of course, and Kharbranth was very special at this time, and it was because it was occupied by our third Unmade, Moelach. Moelach was in Kharbranth throughout the Way of Kings, and Taravangian used the death rattles to assist the diagram. He would intentionally eliminate unimportant or sickly people to collect the prophecies. In fact, in the Wind and Truth prologue, we learned that Taravangian's very own mother gave a death rattle right before she passed away years earlier. These words were the same words shared by Gavilar the day that he died. They come, the Everstorm, the Night of Sorrows. The mechanics of the death rattles are best explained in the chapter 82 epigraph of Words of Radiance. Here, we get a little information about the Unmade from the diagram itself. Though all of them have some relevance to precognition, Moelach is one of the most powerful in this regard. His touch seeps into his soul as it breaks apart from the body, creating manifestations powered by the spark of death itself. This seems to confirm that Moelach is planting these visions in people's souls as they die. We aren't clear on how widespread the death rattles are compared to the thrill from Nergaoul, but they do seem to be far more isolated. In the excerpt of Hessi's Mythica from the Oathbringer chapter 102 epigraph, Hessi states that Moelach can give these visions at different times, not just at death. Moelach clearly has access to Odium's fortune abilities, much like Renarin and Rlain, yet Moelach's manifestation of this ability is far more perverse. During Oathbringer chapter 88, Moelach was likely near Yelig-Nar after the events at Rathalas, as Yezrian or Ahu comments about him being near. We know at some point the Spren made its way to the Horneater Peaks during their invasion, and then he followed Odium's forces to the Shattered Plains. We get new death rattles in Wind and Truth from the Windrunners and their squires as they realize Moelach had arrived at the Second Battle of Narak. We aren't 100% confident where he ended up after this, but he is still around. According to Hessi's Mythica, Chemoarish and the Night Watcher have been mistaken to be the same Spren by many on Roshar. Hessi postulates in Oathbringer chapter 108's epigraph that this is not the case, and they are in fact different. Chemoarish is known as the Dust Mother by the Bav, and they curse by her name. We're given little other information about Chemoarish, so let's make some guesses. Seeing as we haven't seen Chemoarish active on Roshar, well, as far as we can tell, she may be something of a spy. Maybe she impersonates the Night Watcher to get information for Odium. It's possible that Chemoarish uses something similar to the old magic, leading to her and the Night Watcher getting conflated. We know from Wind and Truth chapter 52 that the Night Watcher has become synonymous with the old magic. So Chemoarish wouldn't likely have the same exact power, but perhaps she grants similar boons and curses. Being a single named Unmade, it's unlikely that the Spren is operating with intelligence like the next group of Unmade we'll discuss. I think it's fair to guess that the Dust Mother is currently residing in Bavlan due to her influence there. But again, this is all extrapolating off of very little concrete information. What we do know is that this Unmade will likely be explored more in the next arc of the Stormlight Archive. More than half a decade from now. We will begin the two named Unmade section by discussing Re-Shephir, the Midnight Mother. She can shapeshift into any form she pleases, but always has an oily black color. Her main power is the creation of Midnight Essence. These creatures are semi-conscious and semi-autonomous beings made of black oily liquid that takes the shape of living things. These are directly tied to the Midnight Spores from Tress of the Emerald Sea, being that both are made of the same essence. We see Tress connect to this essence through a Luhel bond, which is typical when controlling Aethers, but we aren't sure how the Unmade operates her creatures. Since Re-Shephir is made of Adonalsium's investiture and the Aethers are entirely separate from his influence, this leaves us with more questions than answers. We see Re-Shephir's influence a number of times in the Stormlight Archive. Her Midnight Essence attacks Yelig-Nar in his 12th vision from Honor. This vision took place during a previous Desolation, and we see the Midnight Essence take the form of eyeless, six-legged animals that leaked black smoke when injured. Ew. In Oathbringer, we find out that the Midnight Mother is hiding in Urithiru when the Radiants first move in, and her Midnight Essence sends Adolin and Shallan on a murder investigation. Because of Re-Shephir's interest in humans, particularly their violence, she sent her spawns to replicate murders that occurred around Urithiru. Re-Shephir's ability to create Midnight Essence and have them resemble many different living beings, including humans, quite accurately leads Shallan to connect Re-Shephir to Creation Spren. This all eventually leads to Shallan's confrontation with her, where upon her touch, the two begin to understand each other. Re-Shephir even attempted to replace Shallan's bond with Pattern herself. Now I need an alternate history where Shallan bonds Re-Shephir. What would an Unmade bond even look like? During the confrontation with Shallan, Re-Shephir reveals that she was trapped long ago by a Lightweaver just like Shallan. This memory causes terror in the Unmade and leads to the creature's eventual retreat. After that, we have no idea where she went or where she currently resides. Sja-Anat, Taker of Secrets, is also a very interesting Unmade that we have seen quite a bit of. She exists between the physical and the cognitive realms, appearing as a woman with black hair or a shadow with white holes for eyes. She can only be seen when she desires and only through either a reflection or moving in the shadows. Her primary ability allows her to corrupt Spren, or enlighten them if you were to ask her. This seems to imbue the Spren with Odium's power, but we aren't sure what this does to lesser Spren beyond making them look different. She uses these lesser Spren as spies, allowing her to fittingly take secrets. We see this corruption in Oathbringer when Shallan discovers the Spren of Kolo-Nar have been changed. Beyond being able to corrupt lesser Spren, she can also corrupt true Spren, like she does with Gliss and Toomey. These mist Spren appear like bright red crystals, which differ from the appearance of normal mist Spren. This enlightenment gives Renarin and Rlain a unique radiant bond with their Spren. As Truth Watchers, they are given the typical surges, illumination, and progression, while also gaining the ability to see visions of the future through Odium's fortune. They have little to no control over these visions though, and they're often inaccurate. In Wind and Truth, we learned that the progression with corrupted Spren looks different than it does with uncorrupted Spren, though we haven't seen this progression in practice yet. The true Spren that she can corrupt also include the Gate Spren of Shadesmar, where she almost had Shallan, Kaladin, and Adolin killed. This is all part of a trap that her and Ashertmarn were setting to eliminate these Radiants. This is part of why Sja-Anat frees Shallan from her first encounter with Ashertmarn, as referenced previously, and it's also the reason for Ashertmarn opening the Oath Gate to the Radiants and fleeing.
It's a trap!
Sja-Anat ended up saving them at the last moment and then successfully lied to Odium about it. So what's up with Sja-Anat? Her motivations seem odd to outsiders, but they're pretty simple when we see her perspective in Rhythm of War. Sja-Anat wishes to be a god, to be free of Odium and to enlighten Spren to become her children. mission, at their own consent of course. We see her lie to Odium a number of times and even work with the Radiants to defeat him. She's incredibly good at deception, and this gives credence to her intelligence. In Wind and Truth, we learn that she doesn't seem to like any of the shards on Roshar, calling Honor a coward and loathing Cultivation for sitting back and watching the chaos ensue. And obviously she hates Odium. She's on her own side and seems to welcome anyone who's no threat to her or her children, as she does invite Shallan to embrace her side. At times, she assists the Radiants. At times, she assists Odium to reduce suspicion, and she even gives corrupted Truthspren to the Ghostbloods to assist them in their goals. We last see her talking to Shallan and Shadesmar just outside of the Urithiru Oathgate, with no indication of her next journey. Yelig-Nar easily has the coolest nickname of all of the Unmade, Blightwind. This spren is housed in a gemstone meant to be consumed by those who wish to bond with him. You see, anyone who takes on Yelig-Nar will gain access to all of the surges of Roshar. Possibly not adhesion because Odium hates it, but Hesi was inconclusive about this. In the cognitive realm, Yelig-Nar appears as black smoke, about the size of a human. The smoke also manifests around those who bond with him in the physical realm. Additionally, carapace and crystal begin to grow out of and into the bonded person's body, and their eyes become a deep red. Why does this happen? Well, Brandon confirmed that the mechanisms here are similar to what happens on Canticle, for those of you who've read The Sunlit Man. Yelig-Nar feasts on the identity and the connection of the bonded person, while in turn giving them extremely powerful abilities. This kind of reminds me of how Nightblood feasts on the investiture of individuals, but you don't really get a nice boon from that, other than an over-talkative god-killing stabbing companion. So far, we have seen both Aesudan and Amaram take on Yelig-Nar, and that, well, that didn't go too well for either of them. In Aesudan's case, she wasn't strong enough to control Blightwind and was consumed rather quickly. Amaram was strong enough to control Blightwind for a time, but this didn't last long. He seemed to gain impressive combat prowess along with his new surges, but he was still defeated by Kaladin damaging his new crystal heart in their duel. He was then finished off by Rock's Grandbow, finally separating Amaram from Yelig-Nar and eliminating Amaram. The Unmade is also briefly mentioned in Wind and Truth when he, as a bonded singer, helps claim the third plateau of Narak before being killed by Sigzil and his companions. It isn't confirmed where he is now, but he's likely back in the hands of the Fused, waiting to be consumed by another host and cause mass destruction. All of this has me wondering, could a highly invested person control Yelig-Nar for a long period of time, allowing him to feast on their investiture? Maybe someone with a lot of stored connection or identity? Who could that be? Dai-Gonarthis, the Black Fisher, was a complete mystery to readers until the release of Wind and Truth. The excerpt of Hesi's Mythica from Oathbringer chapter 113 shared that Hesi isn't sure about the creature, debating if it's even an Unmade. Hesi also states that the 9th Unmade may be responsible for the scouring of Amia. Outside of Jezrien very briefly mentioning the Black Fisher in his drunken ramblings to Dalinar, this is all we hear of the creature until Book 5. In Interlude 3 of Wind and Truth, we learn a little bit more about Dai-Gonarthis. Odium is tasking El with the capturing of the Shattered Plains, but they know that they require more troops. El suggests that the answer is part of Odium himself, hinting at Dai-Gonarthis, as well as confirming the creature to be a splinter of Odium. This confirms that it's an Unmade. Odium states that the Black Fisher is dangerous to let loose, and states that he will have to pay a cost to use the Unmade's abilities. Speaking of which, what are Dai-Gonarthis' abilities? Well, we learn from Odium that she can create Else Gates. These abilities are restricted in the Coalition-held lands. This could be due to the contract, but we're not 100% sure. El states that Nat-Natin, the Shattered Plains, could be accessed should there be enough investiture at both ends of the gate. Odium decides to use Cultivation's perpendicularity in the Horneater Peaks to power one point of the Else Gate, and his own perpendicularity at Narak to power the other point. We then see in chapter 67 that this gate appears as a pit in the ground with a ring of violet light that people can fall through. A final note on her abilities. There is a death rattle that claims Dai-Gonarthis can consume people's sorrows, very similar to what Odium was doing with Vyre. Vienta, Sigzil's honor spren, explains that Dai-Gonarthis desires to destroy the world, and the spren is surprised that Odium would even consider the option of unleashing the Black Fisher. I believe this gives credence to the idea that Dai-Gonarthis was involved in the scouring of Amia, as her Else Gates could quickly send armies to Amia without having to sail there. We also also learn at the end of Wind and Truth that in the post-contest chaos, the Pure Lake had started flooding its nearby kingdoms due to its barriers being broken. I think it's possible that Dai-Gonarthis might have done this, freed to fulfill her desires as part of Odium's payment to the Spren. We aren't sure where Dai-Gonarthis went after sending the army to Narak, but it's likely that she will now start destroying the world as all had feared. Time for the most intelligent and most powerful Unmade, Ba-Ado-Mishram, granter of forms. She appears as a singer femalin, or sometimes as Black Mist with limbs. Mishram is widely known for her cunning and her role during the False Desolation. She took up the mantle of Odium during this time while Rayz was on Braze. In his absence, she gave the singers their forms of power, fueled through the investiture she absorbed at the Well of Control, Odium's perpendicularity. This power is unparalleled by the other Unmade. She was able to form connections with singers across the entirety of Roshar, not just an isolated location. During this time, she showed a level of understanding and compassion towards humans that would be unexpected of a splinter of Odium. While she wouldn't heal the injured humans with progression like she would with injured singers, she would still feel for them. Her compassion was even shown by allowing the listeners to leave her service, defecting from her armies. Even with this compassion, she still thought that she needed to conquer humanity to finally have peace, hence the desolation-sized war she waged. Much like Sja-Anat, she loathes Odium, and she wishes to take his place as the god of the singers. Mishram attempted to foster a lasting peace between the Radiants and the singers by striking a deal with Honor. This was until Honor betrayed her, and the bondsmith Malishi trapped her in a gemstone. Similar to Moelach, she was cast off and sent to rot, though her prison was in the spiritual realm. This massive betrayal and the recreants that followed turned all of the true Spren bonded on Roshar at the time to deadeyes. Also, all singers who held forms of power given by Mishram had their powers ripped away from them, becoming slave forms and subsequently parshmen. This betrayal created a discordant tone across Roshar, and even rendered the sibling dormant because she could no longer hear the tones of cultivation and honor. During the True Desolation, she began to appear in Renarin and Relane's visions, attempting to lead them to her in a very angry way. We later learned that this was possible as the gemstone she was trapped in was cracked, potentially having been dropped by Malishi in the spiritual realm. When the gemstone was finally destroyed by Renarin and Relane, she really wanted to kill Renarin as he was a human, her historic enemy and betrayer. You have to remember, Mishram was isolated in the spiritual realm for thousands of years Rosharan time, and who knows how long in relative spiritual realm time. This pain from being betrayed by Honor and the humans festered in her the entire time. Luckily, Relane convinced her to stay her hand. She then brought Renarin's group from the spiritual realm into the cognitive realm alongside her. According to pattern, Mishram is most comfortable in the cognitive realm. The shattering of her prison led to the healing of the Deadeyes, the discordant tone of Roshar disappearing, and the ability for Honor to be taken by a vessel once again. Such a big wrong was finally righted. An extra note about Mishram. In Interlude 6 of Wind and Truth, Taravangian notes that the power of Odium he wields prefers Ba-Ado-Mishram over him. Later on, when he takes on Honor and becomes Retribution, he still worries about the Unmade supplanting him if he isn't careful. While we knew that she was able to absorb the power at Odium's well, taking on a shard as a Spren is a completely different thing. What are the implications of a splinter of power taking on the entirety of that power? Would she be a vessel in the same way that a physical being is, or would things look different? We don't know the origins of Ba-Ado-Mishram's creation, or any of the Unmade really, so maybe there's something unique with her that would allow this ascension. Anyway, we don't know where Mishram went after taking Renarin's crew out of the spiritual realm. I highly doubt she's going to get over her hatred for humans overnight, but I'm curious about this development going forward, since she seemed to rather enjoy the humans a long time ago. I know that was a lot, but there is one more Spren I want to talk about in regards to Retribution. The Spren of The-Blackthorn. Dalinar was meant to be Odium's champion from the very beginning. From keeping Nergaoul on his tail for decades to prophecies of Dalinar as Odium's champion with 9 shadows, Rayz clearly had his sights on the Blackthorn for a while. At the end of Wind and Truth, Retribution finally finds the Blackthorn. Well, at least the Spren of the idea of the Blackthorn. There are some strong hints here that this Spren will be a huge piece of Retribution's Cosmere-wide conquest plans. Seeing as this is a Spren of great power, I'm wondering if Retribution is going to unmake it to serve him and be under his control, cause that worked out so well for the other ones. There are 9 unmade because 9 is Odium's number, but Odium isn't around anymore. Retribution, on the other hand, is Odium and Honor, 9 and 10. Could Retribution feed the Spren a splinter of itself? Could the Blackthorn become a splinter of Retribution, holding the investiture from one or both shards? Ugh. Well, that's it, Sule. With the pact between the Rosharan shards and Shambles, there's no telling where we may see these Spren again next. When will we finally see Chemoarish? Will we ever learn how an Unmade is created? Will we learn about the origins of the Unmade in Stormlight 6? Remember to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Kolo?